Baker, how are you, sir?
How are you today?
Well.
3 sprinkles and an extra scoop. Let's go. I already went. I could be talked into a second time.
Call me.
Record this, off the mic.
You guys are live.
We can hear you.
We're sorry. We didn't know.
Oh, keep up the good compliments. We love hearing that.
I'll take the
Talking
3
about ice
sprinkles.
cream.
As soon as I see us live on the air with the video, we'll begin, folks.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Good afternoon, commissioners.
Good afternoon.
We're live.
Yeah, I don't see
I
him.
think we can go.
Can we go ahead and go?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our joint meeting with the Board of Education here in person. Dr. Michaels, Jeff Prohl, welcome. And to our colleagues here at the Board of Education, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to open the meeting and allow Dr. Michaels to begin.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Klein and
Yes, sir.
Commissioners. On behalf of the Board of Education, we're here presenting their draft budget today. They're joining us by Zoom. Many of them are at the Board of Education right now. We'll have closed session today in person at the Board of Ed, as well as our meeting tonight, where the board will take comments on our draft budget prior to making a decision to adopt it as their budget for this year. But Mr. Prue and I are here, Chief Operating Officer Mr. Prue and I are here to present the budget on behalf of the board at this point. And with that, we'd like to begin the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll take you through the presentation. We'd be glad to answer questions as we go or answer questions afterwards. I'm not sure what the capability is here on Zoom of our board members being able to participate, but certainly if they might have any questions or comments that they want to make based on your questions, hopefully that can be allowed as well. So
And I think, commissioners, as maybe as the PowerPoint's loading, we provided you with a bound copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as the 41-page full line item budget, as well as the 3-page summary of the changes from FY21 to current. So if you look in the book, there's a green sheet that separates it. Right behind the green sheet is the 3-page composite condensed version, and then beyond the blue sheet is the 41-page full line item, and we'll be pointing out to you at some point how to read through that process.
Okay, are we waiting for the PowerPoint to come up? Go ahead and begin, and we'll have that. There we go. So if we go ahead and advance to the next slide, I don't know if I have that capability here. So a little bit about our budget. Our entire budget, the expenditures are increasing 2%. And I want to stress that with the county commissioners. We have purposely worked hard to keep our budget into a 2% net increase to our total operating budget for this year. What we're going to do is review those expenditures of 2%. They're actually broken into 5 categories here. We'll begin with the first category. So much like the county commissioners, I guess they're advancing the slides. Please advance the slide one. The first thing we do is we look at the current budget that we're in, FY21, and we right-size the budget. So we look at the various items that we changed in the FY21 budget, determine what we want to roll into the FY22 budget, and this is the bulk of what we're rolling into from the current budget. So we had a half-time psychologist in our budget, and we want to make that a full-time position, so we transferred funds from contractual services of psychologist to make that a full-time position. It nets up a half position into the budget. Last year, we were requesting 3 additional custodians for the additional square footage of Sharpsburg and the UIP project, the addition of Barbara Ingram School for the Arts. Our budget was not able to support the addition of those 3 positions. We tried to go without the positions. At this point, we found it necessary to make a cut at South High and move a part of a position from South High to Sharpsburg, and we needed to increase that into a full-time position, so that costs a little bit more than a third of a position. Then in Title I, the federal government has asked to be able to see in our budget that we're paying for experienced teachers. Historically, we've always placed our least experienced teachers just from a funding source in our Title I funding. So we've done some trading back and forth between the general fund, Title I fund budget to make sure that our Title I budget reflects more senior teachers. We've also been able to pick up an assistant principal in the Title I budget, but we've had to transfer back 3K to 5 teachers into our budget, 1 elementary intervention teacher. The money kind of washes itself out. It's only about a $21,000 increase in that whole change. All 3 of these items added together, because of some of them coming from contractual services and things like that, all 3 of these descriptions up here only net up $57,000 to additional funding in our FY22 budget. I am going to ask Mr. Prue, if you notice that little ribbon up in the right-hand corner, it says section Roman numeral 2, A and B. Just to give you a little bit of a description, what that means, how to look at our document, how to find each of these lines. So maybe Jeff will just take the school psychologist as an example and share with the county commissioners how they can find that in a 3-page document, also where it's reflected in the 41-page document.
So commissioners, if, again, Dr. Michael referenced the yellow tab at the top right corner, that refers to the sections of the 3-page consolidated changes from the prior year. So this is the section right after the green sheet in your packet. So when we're looking for the school psychologist, we're actually looking in the section that is section 2. So about a third of the way down the page, you'll actually see the header, which matches up to this slide. It's called FY 2021 alignment. And if you look at line A1, which is the first line, it says 0.5 school psychologist position, and it's an increase of $40,000 in the budget for that line item. It references across to page 16, line 1. So that reverts then to the 41 page where you can actually see it in the line-by-line department level budget. So you can follow from the slide here to the section in the composite consolidated changes, and then from there you can see the reference in the actual page and line item in the 41 page so that you can see every change where it happens in the full budget.
So it sounds a little bit complicated. We are trying to be 100% transparent. I hate that word, but we are transparent with everything that we do here and trying to reflect so you can try to follow the changes throughout the budget. So as we advance to the next slide, we look at our next section. The next section is grant adjustment. So we had a literacy grant. We had it for the last 3 to 4 years. We were hoping it was going to be renewed at the federal level for 5 years. Unfortunately, it was not renewed. We were guaranteed to get the grant, and then the state informed us that the federal government did not renew the grant. We were spending about $1 million a year out of this grant. We carefully looked at the grant. We cut about $550,000 out of really expenses that we really wanted to pull over into the general fund. But in trying to keep our budget at a 2% increase, we were not able to do that. So we looked at the most important parts. This is really the backbone or a big piece of our reading efforts here in Washington County Public Schools, which hinges on the success for many students in many ways. If they can read, it opens up doors of opportunity for them in many ways. So we pulled into the general fund budget 2 literacy coordinators that already exist, 1 English language learner teachers, that's what the EL stands for. This is really the teachers that it's over at our Welcome Center at Pangbourne Elementary. We started 3 or 4 years ago where all EL parents report when they're trying to enroll their child in school. This teacher helps them get enrolled. I was at Pangbourne 2 or 3 weeks ago, and our young lady there in charge of the program had enrolled 8 EL students that day. So this is a very important position. We felt like we need to keep that in the budget. We have a small stipend for a number of reading teachers. They demonstrate lessons to other teachers. They come and visit their classroom and watch them demonstrate lessons. They also help us with professional development. And the last part we've carried over from the grant is our pre-K library. I'm sure some of you have seen pictures where we distribute 50 just very small booklets to our pre-K students as they enter school. Many of our students don't have a single book in their household. And a lot of research about having books in your household and what that means to the future development of your reading abilities. A lot of strong correlation there. So we've been trying to start the family library with this, and we believe it's a vital part to pull over into our general fund budget. So we move to the next slide, our third section, mandatory increases. When I say mandatory, what I've seen out of a lot of other county budgets, neighbors to our east, they'll do an adjustment for inflation. Across the board, they'll do a 2 or 3% adjustment to inflation. We've never done that in any kind of recent history in Washington County. We just continue to buy less with the same amount each year for most of our budget categories. For instance, textbook materials, supplies that we provide to principals to run their schools. We have not increased that line item for 5 years. Our enrollment's increased, yet we have not increased that line item in 5 years. I guarantee you it's buying less than what it bought 5 years ago. But we do have increases in software, contractual services, phone, internet services that we just can't eat within the current budgets. We can't buy less. These are things that have to be fulfilled as part of contractual agreements and the rising costs of things. The total net of all that's $275,000. Our next section we looked at is our compensation and benefits package. So I want you to remember that $6.5 million number. I'm going to show you here in a little bit that our entire budget is going up less. Our entire budget is going up net less than our entire compensation package. That again is how hard we've worked to make cuts in our general fund budget. This section pays for what you're aware of, the minimum wage increase. We're not driving all costs, we're not driving all wages up because minimum wage is going up. We're just, knocking off those bottom grades and sections, steps to cover minimum wage. We had a $390,000 increase in pension costs that has to be covered within this category. And then our salary resource pool has a very modest raise for employees that I think after this COVID year they well deserve. In our current fiscal year, each of our bargaining groups got a 1% raise, and they have all the challenges of COVID this year. I think they're certainly worthy of being compensated with a reasonable raise for next year after receiving a 1%. No step, a 1% total net raise in this current year, and we want to do better than that next year. And to do that, we'll need your support. In our next section, as I said earlier, we went through our budget. We made adjustments of $1.3 million to the negative. So we made $1.3 million in cuts in our baseline budget. Now, a significant portion of this is turnover credit, where we're planning on hiring less expensive teachers as more senior staff, not just teachers, ESP and administrators, more senior staff retire. We do pick up turnover credit. So again, our net budget is not going to go up even as much as our compensation package because of these adjustments. Some places use those adjustments and use it to help increase their budget without making any cuts. That's not how we build our budget. So as we move forward on our presentation, just a little summary of everything I just shared with you. So that first line is at $57,000, that's at psychologists, part of a custodian, the adjustments we made in Title I. The $422,000 is pulling over that Striving Readers grant that's been vital to the building of our reading program here in Washington County. It's pulling over about 40%, 44% of that grant into our general fund. The bulk of that grant is going to be gone. Mandatory increases, again, that internet, contractual services, phone, we just can't cover within those current line items. Compensation package is 6.5. And then where we made program adjustments throughout the FY21 budget, negative cuts of 1.3, the net increase in our budget is $5.9 million, or roughly $6 million. So of a $300 million budget, $6 million is approximately 2%. We can move forward, please. So I shared this with the board, our board, and I think it's important to share with you what's not in this budget. I mean, this budget could easily be a 5 or 6% increase in cost. I could justify every dollar. But again, we were trying to maintain as low an increase in our budget as possible. What's not in this budget is items for pandemic recovery. We are going to count heavily on the next 2 years from the federal government to help us with pandemic recovery. There's federal grant money that's coming forward. Unfortunately, the initial grant and what we hear, part of that $1.9 trillion that they're working on at the federal level right now, that money runs out September of 2023. Our needs for recovering from this pandemic are going to far exceed 2023. I mean, that sounds like a long ways away, but we're here in 2021 right now. By September, we'll be 2 years away from all that money needing to be spent, and our recovery, I fear, is going to go far longer than September of 23. But there's no new money in this budget to address that. There's no new money to address PPE materials and supplies, equipment. Again, we're going to rely on that federal grant for the next couple of years, but I do expect in the future that we'll need to put in additional supplies. I like to hope that people would continue to use soap and sanitizer and maybe if they're sick, wear a mask, things like that. A real concern to me, and I shared this with the board, I don't have any contingency positions in this budget. We generally put 3 to 5 contingency positions with 40-plus schools. It's difficult to tell exactly where all children are going to return. This year, it's going to be exceptionally hard. Will all students turn exactly as they did 2 years ago, prior to the pandemic? Will more show up at one school than another? We can't account for a lot of mobility that happens in Washington County. It's horrifying to me that children are in one school in September and a different school in November and another school by April and even another school right before the last couple of days of school. There's no way for us to see what's happened with some of these children this year. We have about 1,000 children we expect to recover. We don't know what they've been doing for the last year. But I am concerned we don't have any wiggle room with contingency positions. We're likely going to be moving teachers the first week of school. If a school is less enrolled than what we thought, then we need more help in another school. So you might be trained to be a second grade teacher at one school, and suddenly 4 or 5 days into the school year, we're redeploying your class and we're moving you to 5th grade at another school. That's likely to happen this September because we haven't built in any contingency positions to address that. I do believe, again, just based on anecdotal, how many EL kids are out there that aren't enrolled in school right now, our past history and what I've seen being enrolled during mid-year, that our EL numbers are going to be up next year and our need for additional support is going to be up there, and we don't have positions for that. The board's been working on increasing our counselors and social workers to try to decrease our ratio of student to counselor and social worker. There is nothing in this budget that's going to reflect or help with that. I think even the counties had some additional requirements as far as accounting, but the Kerwin Commission is going to have heavy requirements with accounting. We have to trace dollars to individual students at individual schools. And this is going to create an increased burden on our accounting department and on our school secretarial department. And we don't have any resources in this budget to address that. I appreciate what the county has done to try to address our capital budget, but without the replacement of schools, and there's no evidence that we'll be replacing any schools in the next 10 plus years based on our budget, our maintenance cost is going to go up, and the need to replace floors and paint and just do basic maintenance is going to be important. When we would replace a school, all that deferred maintenance goes away with the replacement of the school or modernize the school. So I think we're going to see I know we're going to see an increase in maintenance costs going forward, but this budget does not reflect. This whole list is what this budget does not reflect, and I just can't emphasize that enough. As we look on to the revenue side of the budget, so if we move forward in the slide presentation, we were hoping we're going to be held totally harmless by the state, but the state held us harmless for K-12 enrollment. They did not hold us harmless for pre-K enrollment. I just had a report this morning that our pre-K enrollment, we're already above where we were this time last year with pre-K enrollment, so we anticipate pre-K to be up significantly next year, even beyond where we were last year, I hope. But the state, in essence, in this funding, because of the decreased enrollment, the governor gave us a $7.6 million grant to kind of tide us over to get from one year to the next, where we do expect this enrollment to come back. But this number assumes that the county also will hold us harmless. In other words, that $103 million from last year, that you would repeat that same amount in FY22 that was shared in FY21. All those things come together. The net hit from the state is a negative $1.3 million from our current status here in FY21. Yet we do believe all our students will be back, and we believe we're going to have a substantial number of increased costs and challenges based on COVID. As we roll forward,
May I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the dollar amount of the county's hold harmless?
A hold harmless would be, give us the exact same money in FY21, so 0 increase, but 103 million. I know Sarah's not here. Jeff, you probably have that number somewhere.
The difference in value.
0.
I think you're looking at the amount of the hold harmless. If you were to give only maintenance of effort based on attendance, it's about $3.5 million.
3.5.
And we'll show you that number in just a minute as well. If you choose to take advantage of not paying the $3.5 million, in other words, we'd go down from 103 million, go down 3.5 million. The state hold harmless grant goes away. So instead of the state giving us 1.3 million less, the state would give us 9 million less than they did this year. All the kids are back, all the increased needs and things that we have, that whole list of what no, go
How do
ahead.
you get a negative if they're gonna hold you harmless?
Well, what we're assuming in this slide, so we can back up one slide. In this slide, the state, this is assuming the state holds us harmless at 7.6 million and the county holds us harmless, meaning you don't take away 3.5 million that you could based on a decrease in enrollment. This next slide, as we go forward, assumes that the county doesn't hold us harmless, the state takes away that 7.6 million. So our money from the state goes from 1.3 million down to almost 9 million in the hole. That's the starting point for FY22.
And I think, Mr. Baker, I think maybe to the point of your question, the state held counties harmless on K to 12 enrollment. Because of the size of our pre-K enrollment, we saw a reduction in pre-K enrollment, and that was not included in the hold harmless grant, and that's where you're seeing the decrease in 1.3 million.
Okay, if we could advance the slide. We're a little bit confused in some legislation that's going around right now, trying to follow what's happening, but several weeks ago, the educational effort was identified that Washington County would be required to pay the educational effort again. And the way that law reads, it's the lesser of 3 items. So it's the lesser of statewide increase in wealth per student. The state wealth per student increased by 5.5% last year. For Washington County, the wealth per student increased 6.5% or 2.5%. So the lesser of those 3 numbers is 2.5%. If we'd advance the slide, so when we look at educational effort for this year, similar to the last 5 years, or last 4 years, I think this makes the 5th year, the county be required to increase their funding to the school system in $2.58 million for the educational effort. So we advance to the next slide. So in addition to make this budget whole right now, remember we're working with a negative number from the state, to make this 2% increase in our expenditures whole, we would need the county to hold us harmless, in other words, keep us at that 103 million for the pass, pay the educational effort money, and then we need an additional 4.95 million to make this budget whole. And roll forward another slide. So again, that's a summary as far as cost to the county, the educational effort number 2.58, the hold harmless, Mr. Kiefer, Commissioner Kiefer, to your point, is 0 over what it was before, but that is a $103 million number. And then the additional funding we'd be seeking to make this budget balance is 4.9 million, almost $5 million, for a total increase to the county of 7.5 million. Move forward again, please.
Let me
So-
just a question. But that's if we do hold harmless. You phrase this right. If we don't hold you harmless, we're back to like 100 million for easy numbers, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
So if we hold you harmless, it's 3 million plus the 4.9 request.
Correct, and we,
Okay.
Plus the
we,
educational effort money, yes.
we developed the slides really to show, for our own purposes as well as for your financial team, variance from current FY21 appropriations.
Okay, thank you.
So as we look at the summary of this, negative 1.3 from the state, from the county, we're seeking 7.5. From interest income, we're going to be down 275. I think the county has experience of that, has already had to make some adjustments to your county. So as we get state money, as it's appropriated to us every day, we can have that sit in the bank. We earn a little bit of interest. With interest rates declining over what they were a couple years ago, we've had to take a negative hit with that. So incrementally, the increase in revenue combined, state and county, is 5.9 million. The unfortunate part with the state's number being negative is what takes us to that 7.5 million on the county side. So if we roll forward again. So I've never seen a year where things are more complicated with the budget and more things up in the air. Between Kerwin being up in the air, this federal money being up in the air. I know there's some legislation about MOE, where counties are concerned about the decline in enrollment and how that would drive up MOE if they were to hold counties harmless. The ZAM, the superintendent's organization, is actually supporting legislation that would hold counties harmless for that change in MOE. So we're trying to help out in that method. But in the scenario, the ideal scenario, and what we think we know today, if the state is negative 1.3 million, that's the combination of the hold harmless grant of 7.6, offsetting the decrease of enrollment that would have hit us for 9 million. Look on the local side, we're looking for 7.5. That's the combination of keep us held harmless, no additional money. The law technically reads you need to give more than you gave the year before. So $1 or more, we could have shown $1 there. Obviously, we'll take more, but I'll take a penny there to make it in line with the law. But the educational effort is 2.5. The ask is 5 above that. So the combination of those two numbers is 7.5. And then you see our negative for the interest. You see the $6 million in net total increase, and that's a 2% increase in our total budget. As we roll over a scenario, and I think this may be some other items you need to consider. So advance the next slide, please. This scenario shows if you don't give us anything above holding us harmless and above the educational effort. In other words, and it could be any number in between if you gave us something towards the 4.952 million. But our total increase in our operating budget for next year would be 1/3 of 1%. If you can't find a way to give us more above those absolute requirements. So the 4.9 million is not required, that's our ask. The other money we think is required unless we want to lose out on the state hold harmless grant. But if you're not able to give us anything towards that 4.9 or give us a 4.9, we're going to try to operate next year off of 1/3 of a 1% increase. And that is going to mean some drastic cuts. So approximately $1 million in net new money with a substantial amount of increased costs.
Dr. Michael, can I ask another question on
Sure.
this slide? And I hope this question doesn't try and get in the weeds of anything, but why is it the county's hold harmless dollar amount of 3.5 million isn't under the total local revenue hold harmless? Why was that line item left at 0? Why are we calling that state?
We could show a 10. There's not a grant from you, and we'll actually maybe show it in this next slide. Maybe it'll help answer your question. If you go to this slide, that's at 3.5 million, Commissioner. When you look down there, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th line down, $3,511,580. That is the amount of money that you are not obligated to give us. You would not have to give us. You can decrease our allotment from 103 and change to whatever it turns out to be, 99 something, something shy of $100 million. You have every right to do that. So you would not have to give us that $3 million. So we could say the $3.5 million in essence is the county's hold harmless grant. We were just trying not to complicate the slide. I don't know if that's helping share what I'm trying to get to. But if the county doesn't do the hold harmless, in other words, keep us exactly where we were, and again, the law reads more than where you were last year, so we're looking at it as $1. If you don't give us that $3.5 million based on our enrollment, which we're not obligated to do, if you go to the top part, we lose the hold harmless grant. We lose the 7.6 of the state, and that has us losing almost $9 million from the state as a starting point for next year's budget. As far as we know, you would still be required to give the educational effort amount, the 2.58, and we still would be hit with our interest loss, which would make our net decrease from FY21 over $10 million, or a 3.43% decrease in FY21. So from this budget, it would be that decrease plus what we're requesting an increase, that's $6 million. It'd mean about $16 million would have to be cut from this budget that's been proposed to you if that third scenario were to be true.
I just wonder if a more accurate representation would just be to show $3.5 million under local revenue, because that comes from our budget, not the state's budget. I understand the state contributes some additional, but hold harmless in the scenario with just the 2 columns, county only funds hold harmless, or the BOE's draft budget. To me, it would be more appropriate, since that funding is coming from the county's budget, it should be reflected under the county's contribution. Just
I think what we could have done, Commissioner, to your point, is we could have added a line in the local section that would essentially mirror the state's reporting, where we could have said, revenue base down 3.5 million, hold harmless 3.5 million, because you have every right to decrease your appropriation to the school system by 3.5 million, the same way the state has every right to reduce by 8.9 million. The hold harmless would have added it back.
From our budget.
From your it is from your budget.
Yeah.
What we showed in essence is this is the dollars we're asking for above the FY21 appropriation. From a hold harmless perspective, that number is zero. It's no new money. It's zero.
Yeah, I guess from my interpretation, and as I explain it to citizens, when we say if we hold harmless the Board of Ed, what does that mean? That means we are providing additional funding.
No, hold harmless means you're providing the exact
We're
same.
providing what we did last year, additional over what we're required to do.
That would be accurate.
That would be true.
So I think the county should get credit for that under that scenario.
We could change,
it's
so
to
we
be
could put a
determined.
subsection under the hold harmless where it ends up being zero and describe it kind of in an indent. It's just gonna be the redundancy of numbers. It's gonna be $3,511,580 and it's gonna repeat that same number and it's gonna come back to zero. But we can do that.
I think
In the
just
state one, we broke it out just because it wasn't gonna say zero. If the state would've been zero, we'd have said hold harmless, zero, increase, county, increase, zero. Educational effort would've been additional, and then our ask would've been additional. But we can reflect it that way. We'll change it for our website.
Absolutely.
And ask the board to change it. I mean, I really don't know where else it reflects in our 3-page document, but we can look at that and look at our budget. The net result is zero. The state, we were just trying to show the net result is a negative 1.3 million.
Yeah, we can make those adjustments.
Okay, with that, if we could advance one more slide. I think we're about out of slides.
One more. And advance one more.
So again, just kind of in summary here, I know it's a big ask. Normally the state is carrying the bulk of our request. There was a time that the county carried over 60% of the county's budget. At this point, I think it's less than 40% the county has to carry. You know, we've often had far less than a 2% increase in county budgeting. This would be a bigger increase than 2% to your budgeting part, obviously. But to the budget that we presented, the budget that we've created, it's 2% in revenues, 2% in expenses, balance at a, offset here of $6 million. So I just want to emphasize that this is not a 10-12% budget. The amount of money that we're asking to increase at 5.9 million is less than our whole compensation package. We made other cuts and adjustments to the ask that we have is less than the compensation package that we're requesting. And with that, we'd be glad to entertain any questions. I appreciate your patience. I know it's a lot of numbers and you're bombarded by numbers right this late in the budget season.
Thank you, Dr. Michaels.
And I don't know how you could ask if any of the board members have questions. I'll leave that to you and your tech team.
Dr. Michael, what you can't see is we can see your board members.
Okay.
On this screen, you couldn't see them, but we can see them right now.
All right,
So
gotcha. I just wanted to make sure that they didn't feel, I wanted them to be included in their own presentation.
I
obviously.
think they can see us, we can see them.
Okay.
I'll open the floor up to questions from anyone. Commissioner, school board, folks?
I have a question, Jeff.
Please.
Boyd, when we look at the fact that the state isn't reimbursing us for our drop in pre-K enrollment, is that guaranteed, or are there still efforts being made where is it possible the state could refund us that 1.3? And
We've asked from the superintendent's level that the state look at that. We don't know why that wasn't considered. We've had a rapid advance of our pre-K. I think like 17 counties got hit with a negative number on the pre-K. So we've obviously lobbied as a group that be reconsidered. There's a pre-K expansion grant. Oddly enough, they're willing to give us money to expand pre-K, but they're not willing to give us money to recover with pre-K. We've asked that be taken a look at. We haven't gotten a ruling on that, other than so far the answer's been no. I'm hoping that's not the final say on that. I would say to the county, you don't contribute directly to pre-K. It's not a requirement. Your number's based on our K-12 enrollment. But the state, is paying a portion. I think they pay about $5,000 a pre-K student. So we're down $280 FTEs, full-time equivalents in pre-K, and that's where they're showing that 1.3 million. But we're optimistic that maybe something else will change at the state level, who knows? As we have in the past, if anything were to change at the state level and we receive operating money without strings attached, because sometimes we get additional money, but you have to use it for something you hadn't planned to use it for. But if we get additional operating money in any way, we can reduce our request to the county and would do so as we have in the past. To, Mr. Bickford's point, if somehow they suddenly cover pre-K, we can lower our request to you by $1.3 million.
Thank you.
For clarity, maintenance of effort this year would be based on current enrollments, which would, for easy math, would be 100 million, correct?
Correct.
But you're asking to be hold harmless for what it would be from last year at 103 million.
To keep us the
Approximate
same
numbers, to
total
keep that
budget as
funded.
we got last year, correct?
So does that extra 3 million apply to next year's? How's that work?
That's what this bill is that they're talking about. At least we've seen something from Department of Legislative Services. I haven't seen a bill yet, but there was something that came out in the last couple days where there's a description of how they could do that, and it wouldn't increase your per student allotment. So
Right.
they would kind of let it level. If, let's say we never recovered a single child next year, we probably would go backwards 3.5 million.
Right,
is
as
the
far
way I
as,
think
as far as I know, I'm sorry, Michael, as far as I know, there hasn't been a bill, but you're right. Department of Legislative Services came out with an analysis. They are referencing that they expect a bill to come out. They're calling it a cleanup bill. It has to do with maintenance of effort in Kerwin. And it talks about trying to address maintenance of effort in FY23, like what that would be based on. So we're talking about holding no harms, whatever we would give, counties would give this year. Every county's facing the same situation. So they're talking about how to determine maintenance of effort in FY23, which would go back to either FY21 number or next year's number, whatever the greater one.
And why I asked is to borrow a line from Commissioner Kiefer, we want to be able to explain to the citizens
Right.
how and why what we're doing to assist.
Right, and we're
That's why
not
I asked.
trying to, over-capitalize on maintenance of effort. I do want to do my annual commercial for maintenance of effort. I mean, as hard as the county tries not to let it really boils down to per student allotment. So your per student allotment is less than $5,000, but let's assume it is 5,000. It's 5,000 this year per student. If you never change maintenance of effort, in 5 years, it's still $5,000 a student. If you never change maintenance of effort, in 10 years, it's still $5,000 a student. If you never change maintenance of effort, in 50 years, it's still $5,000 a student. No other department, I don't think, is asked to operate under those types of circumstances. That's the amount per student. If enrollment were to go down, you still could have a negative net amount going to the county, to the Board of Education because of less enrollment, even with increasing maintenance of effort per student. But I always look at it as a per student amount. While I know it's a goal of the commissioners historically to keep us at the exact same amount year after year, that is not sustainable for the long term. It's not even sustainable in the short term. I would really encourage you from a budgeting standpoint to look at, should you be increasing maintenance of effort a couple percent per year? Some amount, but always to try to keep it the same. If it'd be the same as it was 25 years ago, instead of 103 million, we'd probably be getting 25 million from you. It just would not be sustainable.
And for instance, if I can piggyback on that, at the state level, the foundation amount, which is the base amount that is provided for in funding, is based on a measure of CPI, a specific measure that's in legislation relating to a metric, I believe in July of every year. That's the data point that the governor uses when building his budget for the period coming forward, so that there is an inflationary measure to how the state applies funding in a normal year. This, unfortunately, the hold harmless gobbled up the inflationary measure for FY22, but that's how the state does their budgeting. Because essentially their foundation amount is also based on a per student allotment, but it has an inflationary measure in the legislation.
Commissioners, school board, any questions, comments? Dr. Michaels, any questions, comments more?
No, I just again want to make a plea. In the past, the state From a county standpoint, I think it's a great thing. The state's been carrying the bulk of the increase. This year, I just encourage you to look at our total budget. Our total budget's increasing 2%. I know that you have, dozens of other departments that are gonna approach you. I challenge you to find how many of them are coming to you with a 2% increase to their total budget. Now granted, this is a split effort between county and state. But with that negative number from the state right now, that shift of how much the burden has to come to the county is more. And this is a year we really need your support. This is I hate to use the word bare bones budget because that sounds, everyone's coming in with a bare bones budget. But if you look at our increases, it's really maintaining what we had this year. There aren't increases. We're pulling things in from other grants. We have things we had here in FY21. And beyond that, it's some compensation for employees that well deserve a raise this year, especially after this year of COVID. It has been absolutely insane for our staff, what they've had to go through, what they're still going through, concurrent learning. We're working hard as a system to bring our students back. I think, I can't prove this exactly, but I would probably suspect we have more students back than any county in the state of Maryland. And we're not we're the middle of the pack county. I saw a big article where Montgomery County brought 703 children back. I think it's today, or I guess it was Monday. I think it's great that they brought 703 children back, but they have over 100,000 students. We are, I don't know where we are now, but we're somewhere north of 13,000. We might be 15,000. I haven't, because today, Monday, we brought back a pretty significant increase additional students on Monday. We're planning on our next wave of additional students coming in on 15th. So I'd like to know, but I think it was true in the fall, that we had the most students back in the state of Maryland at 6,600. And I'm pretty sure today we have the most students in the county, in the state of Maryland back. And again, our staff's working extremely hard. They got a 1% raise for all the work they've done with concurrent learning, distance learning, all the technology they've had to learn, all the adjustments they've had to make, the risks they've had to take with COVID-19. Our ESP staff and our administrative staff have been back since last June, actually the end of May last year. We went out on the governor's order on March 13th. Senior staff never left, principals never left the building, I never left the building. But we've been in our building since March 13th. But all ESP, all 12-month employees, all administrators returned to their buildings in late May of last year, and we have been back and working. That deserves more than 1% raise. So obviously a portion of this budget is raises, and I do want you to consider that, please.
I see Mr. Bickford raised his hands, pardon the interruption. Mr. Bickford?
Yeah, and it just brings to mind, I was going to make much the same statement that Boyd made, that, really this boils down to a pay increase for staff. But I also, since I know it's part of your job to help us get through this pandemic, you as the commissioners, and it's also part of your job to brag about our county. One thing, my wife teaches in Frederick County, so I'm always comparing apples with both counties. And I think you should be very proud of the county as a whole, that we, working with our health authorities and with Meritus, and really with Dr. Michael really pressing hard, have really been able to get our teachers vaccinated, our staff vaccinated. And I think that's something that you on the Board of Commissioners can also brag about as well. I just didn't want that to go amiss, because I see other counties really struggling to get their staff vaccinated because they're getting a certain supply of vaccines. And we were able to do that. And so I just wanted you to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other closing remarks?
Yes, President Klein, this
Please.
is Melissa Williams.
Please continue.
Yes, I want to thank you for meeting with us this afternoon. It's been quite some time since we've been able to have a joint meeting of our boards. I look forward to the time when we can meet together in person, but I am grateful that we have the means and the ability to do this virtually while you're meeting in person. So thank you for the opportunity to hear our presentation, and on behalf of the board, we hope that you'll give consideration to full funding of our budget. Thank you, President Klein.
Thank you very much. Any other closing comments? If not, Dr. Michaels, Jeff Proulx, board members, commissioners, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
day to you. Thanks for joining us. Commissioners, that being the last item on our agenda for the day, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everybody.